Hey everybody, it is Trags Mike Petralia back with the latest installment of the Jungle Roar podcast, our final installment of the pod before we take a little bit of a hiatus and come back ready to go, roaring full scale for training camp, which begins, of course, on July 23rd on the Kettering Health practice fields outside Paycor Stadium. This podcast is brought to you by our good friends at All Good Home Improvement and Prize Picks, and of course, the great staff at CLNS Media. My pleasure to bring back a very trusted guest and a terrific colleague of mine on the Bengals beat, and the host of the Bengals Booth podcast, as well, of course, as the voice of the Cincinnati Bengals and Cincinnati Bearcats. That's a mouthful. What an intro for Dan Hoard. How you doing, Dano?
Trags, I'm great. You look like a man who's very relaxed, on the verge of going on vacation. And I must say, you have much better lighting than I do. For the life of me, I cannot figure out a way to avoid the massive glare in my glasses, and you pulled it off. So whether you've got a nice ring light or what you've got going on there, you've done a nice job of lighting yourself.
Well, I appreciate that. We can go offline, as they say, and discuss the lamp that is in my face, and it works effectively, and that's all I look for. Something that doesn't make me look hideous on the camera. That's all I'm looking for.
We're setting the bar very high, trying to avoid hideous. I like it.
Yes.
You've succeeded. You are less than hideous.
Thank you. Okay, the title of this podcast, Dano, is called Why Optimism and Expectations Will Meet Reality with the 2025 Cincinnati Bengals. I'll ask the question very simply. Why do you think that is the case?
Well, you wrote the headline, so what if I disagree? I mean, it's possible. In this case, though, I do agree. I think that they are going to be one of the highest scoring teams in the NFL. I think simple math and logic indicates that the defense is going to be better. It can't be any worse. I suppose it could be close to as bad, but I don't think it will be. I think Al Golden is the right man to develop some of the young players they've drafted over the last 4 years, and they've drafted a bunch on defense. It's time for these guys to take the next step. I think it's a logical step. So assuming that they are relatively healthy, I do think that optimism and expectation will meet somewhere in the middle, and the Bengals will have an excellent year.
The reason I think they'll have an excellent year is I do think they're putting their faith in the right places. Joe Burrow, obviously, that he has been paid. Jamar Chase and T. Higgins have been paid. And there is a sense to me around or inside the locker room, I should say, let's start there, that indeed the organization has taken care of the biggest pieces that matter the most. And you have to do that. That's a starting point. And I think they feel they've done that. I don't think there will be any distractions. And obviously you can never account for injuries. They're going to happen. But, you like to think that they stay reasonably healthy. If they do, and Burrow is on the field for all 17 games this year, or 16 if they happen to be in very, very good position by the end of the year. If he is on the field for all of the games that matter, they are going to have, like you said, a successful offense. To me, like you said, there's so many questions with the defense. I think the defense needs to be better from not only stopping the run on the defensive line, but the secondary has got to create some turnovers.
That was Al Golden's specialty at Notre Dame. They led the nation last year in takeaways. They were tied for first in the country in defensive touchdowns. It's what he did so well. And I have tweeted video of this during OTAs and minicamp. I thought it was really interesting that even before practice officially began, they had 4 stations of takeaway drills that the defensive players voluntarily did before they actually went out to practice. So in one of those stations, you punch the ball out. In another one, you come up behind the ball carrier and strip it away. Just these little things that reinforce the importance of trying to come up with takeaways, or as Al has termed it, ball disruption. So I do think that that's going to be something that they do really well. And it was something that they actually did fairly well last year. As bad as the defense was as a whole, they were middle of the pack in takeaways. And I think they are going to be very high in that category this coming season.
One moment that stood out in OTAs to me, and I'm sure you remember this, is when Cam Taylor-Britt picked off a corner and out pattern that Joe Burrow threw, and I think it was to Mike Gesicki. I can't.
That's correct.
Yeah, and he made a diving catch, and a lot was made of it. Cam Taylor-Britt got really pumped up about it. The defense got really pumped up about it, and that was obviously the series in which, or the sequence, I should say, that had Joe Burrow firing deep to Jamar Chase on the very next play for a touchdown. But my point is, I think that that showed a mentality that we are going to lay all out to get turnovers this year. It's one play, it's OTAs. I understand that, but it's the mentality, and I think there is something to be said for establishing a mentality in OTAs in the offseason that matters, and with Cam Taylor-Britt in particular.
I had a bigger takeaway, or a different takeaway, I should say, from that particular play. It's where Cam Taylor-Britt lined up. He lined up in the slot opposite of Mike Gesicki, and it's something that we saw a lot of during the minicamp practices. The corners were playing all over the place, and I asked Al Golden the question. He didn't completely answer it, and maybe he doesn't want to in case other teams, are looking at the video of these news conferences. But was that a matter of cross-training guys, or is that what the Bengals intend to do once the games begin, moving their corners all over the place? We know that Dax Hill has that kind of versatility, but can Cam Taylor-Britt and DJ Turner and Josh Newton do similar things? I think Josh Newton can. We'll see with Cam and with DJ Turner. But if you can do that, if you can confuse teams by moving your corners around, who knows where Dax Hill's going to be snap to snap? Is he going to line up in the slot and blitz? Is he going to be on the outside where he played so well in the 5 games that he played last year? I think it's a really intriguing thing to look, to be studying during training camp and then in the early portion of the season.
If Dax Hill is healthy and fully recovered, and we anticipate, that he is going to be cleared, if not before training camp, pretty soon thereafter, if he doesn't start the season training camp on PUP, but he'll be ready pretty soon thereafter. Where does he wind up in the secondary? Is he back to his outside corner position, or might Al Golden use him as an X factor in the secondary?
I think he will be an X factor, but my guess, and it's just a guess, is that he probably starts on the outside. He made such a successful transition from safety to outside corner last year. And let's face it, outside corners are hard to find.
Yes.
There's a reason why they get paid roughly twice as much, the elite ones, roughly twice as much as the best slot corners, because it's one of the most difficult things to add to your roster. It's why those guys get drafted really high year after year. So if you think that Dax Hill is capable of being an elite outside corner or close to it, or if you think he's the best one you have, you almost have to play him on the outside. So I think that he'll wind up doing both because he is maybe the most versatile chess piece that they have. But I get the sense that maybe you start him on the outside. You see if Josh Newton can handle the slot. You wind up playing the 3 good outside corners that you have in terms of talent with Cam, DJ, and Dax, all of them getting a lot of snaps on the outside, and see how that looks at the end of camp.
One of my favorite quotes, actually, it was my favorite quote from Al Golden of OTAs, or actually in mandatory minicamp, Dan, and that was the tyranny of comfort. I love that line so much because it reflects to me that he doesn't want anyone feeling comfortable and set in one particular position, one particular role. And I think getting that message across to everyone, not only players, but some of his assistants, I think that's a great message to send.
I think that's something that Al lives by himself. Every day is a new day. There are always new challenges. You have to be willing to experiment, to learn, to give new guys an opportunity. You can't rely on yesterday's successes. So that's, I think, one of his distinguishing characteristics. He is one of those guys that's always stepping on the gas, trying to take the next step. And it's one of the reasons why I think he's been so successful in the many things that he's done in his coaching career, whether it was college head coach. I mean, the dude wanted Rutgers. Nobody wanted Rutgers before he was the head coach there. He did reasonably well at Miami when they were going through NCAA difficulties. I just think he's a great coach. And I know Zach Taylor and the Bengals front office are thrilled that he's back.
Speaking with Dan Hoard, voice of the Cincinnati Bengals and a terrific host of the Bengals Booth podcast. We'll get to that more in just a moment. I want to tell you about All Good Home Improvement. All Good has been helping homeowners for 32 years. When looking for a home improvement company, the number one quality they are looking for is trust. For the last 32 years, All Good has been trusted to help homeowners like myself replace their windows, install new vinyl siding, install new gutters, and professionally install a new roof like we had put on our home here in Greater Cincinnati. They did a tremendous job. Ed Grant and his staff did an amazing job keeping us up to date, giving us competitive price, and getting the job done quickly and cleanly. All Good offers interest-free financing with payment starting at just $99 a month and no money down. All of All Good's products are professionally installed and backed by both a material and labor warranty. Right now, All Good is offering a 50% off sale or buy one, get one free. For more details and to schedule a free in-home consultation, simply call 513-247-2900. That's 513-247-2900 or go to myallgoodhome.com. Back with Dan Hoard, voice of the Cincinnati Bengals and the Bengals Booth podcast. Dano, there's been a lot of focus, I think, this offseason on the coaching staff and the kind of pressure that Zach Taylor might be under this season. And I'm curious to get your concept or your thoughts on what type of vibe is going around the coaching staff and if they understand that the time is now to take that next step as an organization.
Of course they do. They've got Joe Burrow going into his 6th NFL season. Teams dream of having a quarterback like that, and they've missed the playoffs in back-to-back years. Now, 2 years ago, Joe was hurt, missed the tail end of the season, and so you kind of write off that season as a result. But last year, he had an MVP caliber season, and they missed the postseason. So sure, everybody in the building knows how important this season is. I don't necessarily think that Zach Taylor feels some sort of added pressure. You're an NFL head coach. There's always pressure. And he works for one of the most patient owners in the NFL in terms of making coaching changes. So I don't have any sense whatsoever that Zach and his staff are going into the building panicked that if they don't win 11 plus and have postseason success, that they're going to be out of a job next year. But, you know, they work ridiculously long hours and under very stressful circumstances with the payoff of trying to win a Super Bowl. That's what these guys live for and dream about. So there's pressure every day. And with Joe Burrow and the, almost automatic chance you have of being a contender, yeah, they recognize the stakes are very high.
I will tell you what impresses me the most about Zach Taylor, not just the way he handles success, but by the way he handles adversity. I have never seen him so out of character that I thought he was really upset or, how do I put this? Just frustrated to the point where he was doing something out of character. Either whether it's with us in the media, whether it's something on the field. I find him a remarkably consistent personality. And I think the Browns and the Blackburns appreciate that. And that's one of the things I think they saw in him when they hired him back in 2019.
I didn't get to know Paul Brown, but that sounds like a pretty decent description of his personality based on all the books I've read about Paul over the years. And I got a preview of exactly what you just talked about with Zach Taylor in the 1 year he spent at the University of Cincinnati as offensive coordinator. It was Tommy Tuberville's final year. They had a lousy year. The walls were closing in on Tubbs and the entire program. And I hate to say it, but Coach Tuberville was throwing Zach under the bus at every opportunity. They had a quarterback situation where they were changing quarterbacks week to week. I think they had 3 different guys start that year. And instead of having the attitude that a head coach usually has, where they say the buck stops with me, Coach Tuberville was basically saying, well, it's Zach's decision, and I'm kind of leaving it up to him, which head coaches typically don't do with a first-year offensive coordinator. Zach never bristled, always maintained a positive attitude. His quarterbacks loved him. So I kind of had the sense that he was going to have that even-keeled personality as a head coach when he got his opportunity in Cincinnati.
Do you get a sense that the players really enjoy that more than the alternative of a coach screaming and yelling, or not even screaming and yelling in this day's NFL? You really don't see that too much, but a more strict, close to the vest head coach.
I think what they like is the authenticity. Zach Taylor does not have a phony bone in his body. He is a good person, family man, normal guy, as normal as you can be for somebody that has one of those 32 jobs. And I think players see through that very quickly in every sport. They want authenticity, and that's what they get. I mean, he is the polar opposite of Dan Campbell, but Dan Campbell is as authentic as he can be.
Sure.
And that's why the Lions love him, and it's why the Bengals players love Zach. They know that they are getting an authentic person who cares about them as players and as people and knows what he's doing. And that's generally how you have good relationships between players and coaches.
And I'm not saying it's the sole reason, clearly, but I think Zach Taylor is a reason that Trey Hendrickson would like to return to Cincinnati. I think he will return to Cincinnati. I do not have inside information, but I think all things being equal, Dan, I think Trey Hendrickson and the Bengals get a minimal contract extension done, and I think he plays for the Bengals this year. And I don't think it's going to be a holdout situation, at least into the season.
I think he's going to play for the Bengals this year. He is under contract for this year. The question for me is, will they work out an extension beyond this season, or do they just eventually find the middle ground that makes him happier for one more year in Cincinnati and they move on after that? I know the Bengals would like to extend him. Trey obviously wants to stay. Part of that, I think, is his relationship with Zach. I think he likes the city. I think he would like to be recognized as one of the Bengals' all-time greats. And he certainly had one of the best stretches of play of any defensive player in franchise history. So I hope they can work out something where he's here for 2 or 3 more years, 3 more years, including this one. So this year plus 2 more. I think that would probably be as long as it could be. But we'll see. But getting back to your original point, I do think he will be lining up on the right side of the defensive line this season.
Who is on the other side? I think it's probably going to be Joseph Osai to start the season. I think that's the most logical solution at this point, but there are other alternatives. Miles Murphy, there's going to be a lot of focus on Miles Murphy to start training camp, to start the preseason, and then the regular season. We're obviously waiting on Shamar Stewart to sign his rookie deal, get on the field. I think that will happen sometime right around the start of training camp. Again, no inside information, but that is just reading the tea leaves. That's what I believe will happen. And they have Cam Sample. There are a lot of bodies out there, I think, Dan, but which one step forward? I think that's what Bengal fans are wondering on the other side of Trey Hendrickson.
I can tell you this. Joseph Osai expects to be the starter on the opposite side of Trey. At the end of the 3-day mandatory minicamp, I did a brief interview with Joseph, and I said, with Trey not being here in the offseason program and Shamar being here but not practicing, you have typically been lining up with the ones as one of the defensive ends. Do you expect that to be the case at the start of the season? And he said, I've been expecting that all along. He said, my expectation is that Trey will be back and that I will be the starter on the opposite side. Now, that doesn't mean he plays every snap. Miles Murphy is going to get every opportunity to show that he is the guy the Bengals thought he was when they selected him in the first round.
Right.
And Shamar Stewart's obviously going to play a lot. So, hopefully that means that Trey is back, and Trey is getting more breaks than he's had in the past. He's not going to have to be out there for as many snaps. And whoever is playing the bulk of the time on the opposite side is not going to have to be out there as much as Sam Hubbard was. Keeping these guys fresher would help. So let's hope they have them all. I don't know if Joseph is right and he will be the starter, but even if he is, those other guys are going to get plenty of opportunities.
Speaking with Dan Hoard, voice of the Cincinnati Bengals. Want to tell you about Prize Picks, the best place to turn your sports knowledge into cold, hard cash. With millions of members, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least two players for a shot to win up to 2,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks. On Prize Picks, you can mix and match player projections from different sports. Combine your favorite basketball players with players from baseball, hockey, esports, and much more. Prize Picks invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. And every Friday, this is a reminder, is Flex Friday. Make sure you opt in and tap the checkbox in your lineup builder to be eligible for the protected play. Choose squares from any game on the board, and if your lineup does not win, you get your net losses back in promo funds up to your promo limit as soon as the lineup settles. Download the app today and use the code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That is code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Back with Dan Hoard, voice of the Cincinnati Bengals and the Bengals Booth podcast. What does Dan Hoard do? I asked this knowing part of the answer anyway, to unwind during the summer.
Golf whenever possible, Trags. You know that. I love to play. My season is relatively short. Once training camp begins, the golf clubs pretty much get put away. But during this window, from the end of the mandatory minicamp until training camp begins on July 23rd, you will find me on a local golf course as much as I can get out there.
Do you like to read?
Sure, I do. And my wife is a crazy reader. I mean, she's
voracious reader.
Voracious reader. She's got a book in her hands at all times. And because she does that, I have the advantage of her passing along the books that she knows that I'm going to like. So she is kind of my screening service. She will, go through several and then eventually say, okay, here's one that you would enjoy. And she's almost always right. There have been very few that she's recommended over the years that I haven't enjoyed.
I will tell you, and I don't think I'm speaking out of school too much here, I had an opportunity to play with Dick LeBeau, former Bengals head coach, play on the golf course last week. And it was just a delightful time, as a good friend of mine would like to say. It was a delight being on the golf course with Dick LeBeau. And I will tell you, Dan, I was so amazed with his athletic ability. I mean, he is in his mid-80s and still hitting the ball 220 yards down the fairway. I was blown away. And the reason I bring this up, we discussed his book Legendary, which details that 2008 Steelers season. But, we also talked about how much he appreciates how much the Brown family loves football and how loyal they are to the city of Cincinnati. And he told me at that time last week that I don't think Cincinnatians always appreciate how much the Browns have been loyal to the people of Cincinnati. And as a native Cincinnatian myself, that kind of hit home with me.
People around the country think of Dick LeBeau as a Steelers coach, and for good reason. He won two Super Bowls as the Steelers defensive coordinator. I think he spent 14 years as their defensive coordinator, and they finished in the top 10 or maybe even the top 5 in defense in 11 of those 14 years. So he had an incredible run there as defensive coordinator, but he was actually an assistant coach and or head coach with the Bengals longer than he was in Pittsburgh. I know in his mind, he thinks of himself as a Bengal and as a Steeler. It's probably close to an even
And
split.
a Lion. And a Lion.
Well, yeah, 14 years as a Lions player, a Hall of Famer as a player, 62 interceptions. Dick LeBeau will be 88 in early September, Trags.
That's incredible.
I know he shoots his age every time he golfs. Did he shoot in the 70s when you played?
Close. He was actually under his age when he shot when we played last week. It was it was
so
remarkable.
he always breaks his age. Just an incredible person. 59 consecutive years in the NFL, 14 as a player, 45 as a coach. He was still calling defenses at the age of 80 with the Tennessee Titans. He's one of the most remarkable people I have ever met in my life. It bums me out that his head coaching tenure in Cincinnati didn't go well. The team obviously was not very talented at the time. He didn't have a good quarterback when he was the Bengals head coach. I do think he put some things in place that helped Marvin Lewis get off to a 500 start in his first year as head coach. But it would have been nice to have had successful NFL head coach on an otherwise, unblemished career record as a player and as an assistant coach.
And I'll wrap up my point here on Dick LeBeau. He had his own way of relating with players that there were some similarities with the way Zach Taylor did it. And obviously Dick LeBeau didn't have Joe Burrow as his as his quarterback. And that makes a big difference, obviously. But the way he related with his players, and he told me this when we were on the course together, you have to be able to relate with your players in different ways at different times. And, the simplicity of that is pretty evident and I think timeless, whether you were a coach in the 70s, 90s, or the 2020s.
And he related with his guys right up to his last year as a coach at age 80. He had a remarkable ability to connect at any stage of his life with players that were between the ages of, 22 and 34 or whatever. It was really unique. And his former players speak of him in terms that you rarely hear players use when talking about their coaches. There's a love and a reverence for Dick LeBeau that is about above and beyond any coach I've ever heard. I mean, it's a mixture of love and respect. You often get one or the other when players talk about their former coaches, but in his case, it's a blend that, like I said, is unlike just about any other coach I've ever heard of.
All right. I'm going to steal a theme from your Bengals Booth podcast and ask you for a breakout player this year. And I have mine, and I think on your podcast, I said Chase Brown. Or Andre Yosevich. I'm sorry, I said Andre Yosevich, but I was going back and forth between the two, obviously. But Chase Brown, to me, is going to be a player that's going to be critically important to this offense this year. And I just want to get your thoughts on Chase Brown and the step forward he could make this year.
In the 8 games where he was the primary running back last year after Zach Moss suffered his neck injury, Chase Brown was number 3 in the NFL in combined rushing and receiving yards. If you take his average for those 8 games, it would compute to 1,976 combined yards for a 17-game season. Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry would have been the only 2 guys in the NFL at the running back position that topped that last year. Right. That's the kind of impact that he could have. Can he stay healthy at an increased workload over 17 games? We'll see. He doesn't have the physique of Derrick Henry, certainly. Very few players do. I would like to think that with the return of Samaje Perine and the drafting of Taj Brooks, they'll be able to take some of the load off Chase Brown, and I think they would like to do that. But he's a stud. I mean, his explosiveness is very rare. The Bengals haven't had a guy like that in a long time. And I do think, based on his success in those 8 games that where he was the man in the second half of the season last year, Dan Pitcher is going to look to lean on him a little bit more from the start of games than he did last year.
One thing that I wanted to say on your podcast, and I thought of it after the fact, is there a possibility the Bengals have 3 receivers with double-digit touchdowns in 2025?
Sure. You assume that Chase and Higgins will do it or be close to it. They did it last year. So then the question becomes, who is the third? Could it be Mike Gesicki? He had 65 catches last year. He didn't have a lot of touchdowns, but he's capable of it. Could it be Chase Brown? I mean, Chase had 4 touchdown catches, 7 touchdown runs last year, I believe, off the top of my head. It's possible. And Andre Yosivach has a combined 10 touchdown catches in 2 NFL seasons where he's been something of an afterthought in terms of how many times he's targeted. I think his targets are going to go up. He's an excellent red zone threat, and I think he's getting better and better. So it's hard to do. It's hard to have 3 guys with double-digit touchdowns, but it's not out of the realm of possibility, certainly.
Is there a step or a advancement you want to see in Joe Burrow's game this year?
The advancement is just to get hit less. Some of that's on him. Some of that's on his offensive line. When Zach Taylor was asked about it in his final media scrum at the end of the 3-day mandatory minicamp, he said a major factor is going to be trying to play with leads, not getting in these shootouts where you have to drop back and throw it a million times, and the other team knows that you're going to do that and can, pin their ears back and go after Joe. So to me, it's hard to top what he did last year. He was magnificent, setting the franchise record for passing yards and touchdown passes. But can we cut down on the number of times that he winds up on his butt? That's the thing I would like to see more than anything else. He can help himself by throwing it away from time to time. I understand his reluctance to do so. He's always looking to make a play, and I appreciate that. But let's try to minimize any chance of him having to miss time because of the number of hits that he takes.
You realize that if it goes as planned and the Bengals do what you're talking about offensively, he could wind up with less numbers. His numbers could decrease this year because last year he was throwing so much because the Bengals were behind in a lot of the games and they had to play catch up. And that, I think, contributed to his phenomenal season.
Yeah, let's have the passer rating go up and everything else go down, because they have leads and they don't have to throw it a million times in the fourth quarter. I'm fine with that. How about topping a 110 passer rating for the first time in franchise history and having, 38 touchdown passes instead of 40 plus? I think every Bengals fan would sign up for that if it means they've got leads, they get off to a good start, they're contending for a title in the AFC North, and we don't need to see Joe break his own records for passing yards and touchdown passes.
All right, we're going to wrap up here with a football question, but it's not on the field. It's off the field. It's the news that the Bengals came to terms with Hamilton County on a new 11-year lease through the year 2036. And as the broadcaster of the team, you're obviously paying attention to all of the X's and O's, coaching staff moves in and out and whatnot. How much attention did you pay to that, and how much of a good sign is it for the franchise moving forward?
I paid really close attention to it. That's my job. If for some reason things didn't work out and the Bengals moved, I might be looking for work. So I'm happy that's not the case. But it's great for the county. It's great for Bengals fans. It's great for the city of Cincinnati. And it's good for the Bengals. They didn't want to leave. Mike Brown played a very instrumental role when his father got the opportunity to have his own franchise in choosing Cincinnati. Paul Brown basically put Mike Brown in charge of where they were going to wind up. And they looked at cities all over the country that didn't have NFL teams. Right. They determined that Paul's roots were in the state of Ohio, that Cincinnati had been a great franchise for a great city rather, for a Major League Baseball franchise, and would support an NFL team. And the city of Cincinnati obviously has. So I think it's a win-win. If you are a taxpayer in Hamilton County that thinks that the original lease was too burdensome on the taxpayer, well, it's not as burdensome as it used to be. The Bengals are paying a bigger share. People are always, some people at least, are always going to complain about any taxpayer support going to professional sports franchises, but I'm not one of those people. I think it benefits the city and the county tremendously to be one of 32 places, or even less than that, since some cities have 2 teams, that can call itself an NFL city. It is the most popular sport in the country by far. It's not even close. Right. And we benefit greatly by being one of those places that has an NFL team.
I thought that Katie Blackburn, in the actual release last week when announcing it, I'm going to read from it right here. I thought the quote was perfect. "We are proud to call Paycor Stadium our home and keep our future here in Cincinnati where it belongs." And, I think that's what really the whole lease extension is about. It's also about doing what's best for downtown Cincinnati. This is obviously, and Bengals pointed this out in the release, that they contribute, I believe it was $1 billion to the revenue streams that keep the banks flourishing in downtown Cincinnati. And we've all been to the bank stand, and that's a great atmosphere, not only for Reds games, but for Bengals games as well.
No doubt. And another thing that I think people should recognize in this new agreement with Hamilton County is that the county now is going to have say over events that take place at the stadium when the Bengals are not playing home games. We are probably going to see more concerts. We are probably going to see more other football games, whether it's college, high school, whatever. I think that's a good thing. I think the Bengals will welcome it going forward. So, any way that we can get more use out of a beautiful facility that seats more than 60,000 people is probably a good thing for everybody.
I would like to see a bowl game. How about that? A bowl game at Paycor Stadium. Think that's possible? I'm literally thinking off the top of my head. I wonder if that's even possible.
Maybe TQL Stadium has looked into the possibility of having a college football bowl game. And right now there seems to be a saturation of bowl games, or maybe we're going to have fewer going forward instead of more. So whether it's a bowl game or just maybe it's, one of these early season showdowns between the University of Cincinnati and a big time opponent, or maybe even Ohio State or Kentucky, somebody like that comes and plays an early season showdown at Paycor Stadium where the weather's, a little bit more guaranteed of being good. I would love to see it. I think the fan base would support it. Got really fond memories of when UC played Ohio State at Paycor Stadium, or UC played Oklahoma at Paycor Stadium. Maybe some games like that can happen going forward.
All right. I have taken 38 minutes of your time during a period of time where you are usually on the golf course. I greatly thank you, Dan Hoard, voice of the Cincinnati Bengals.
Trags, always a pleasure. Thanks for having me on. Enjoy your upcoming vacation. I look forward to seeing you at camp.
All right, he is Dan Hoard, the one and only voice of the Cincinnati Bengals. Also, please download wherever you download your podcast, the Bengals Booth Pod. It is a great, great listen. I happen to be fortunate enough to be invited on the last one by Dan, along with other excellent, outstanding Bengals beat writers for their thoughts on the upcoming season. So please be sure to do that. Also want to thank our great sponsors, and that would be All Good Home Improvements and Prize Picks, and our team at CLNS Media. Until next time, keep that jungle roaring.